And I actually see this happen with a lot of the writers I work with. They feel really passionate about certain parts of an idea they have, but because they have no idea what the conflict is going to be, it becomes really hard for them to complete a first draft. Welcome to the Fiction Writing Made Easy podcast. My name is Savannah Gilbo, and I'm here to help you write a story that works. I want to prove to you that writing a novel doesn't have to be overwhelming. So each week, I'll bring you a brand new episode with simple, actionable, and step-by-step strategies that you can implement in your writing right away. So whether you're brand new to writing or more of a seasoned author looking to improve your craft, this podcast is for you. So pick up a pen and let's get started. In today's episode, we're going to talk about how to choose between two or more story ideas, and then how to make sure the idea you choose has enough meat to support a full-length novel. And the reason I wanted to talk about this today is that a lot of writers have a hard time choosing between two or more ideas or staying focused on one idea when other shiny ideas or stories pop into their head. So if you've ever struggled to stay focused on just one book idea, or if you have too many ideas floating around in your head and you're having a hard time figuring out which one to focus on next, then I think you're really going to enjoy today's episode. Now, the reason it's so important to take some time and think about your idea or to flesh out your idea before you start writing is because you're going to spend a lot of time with the story, right? I mean, this novel could be something you work on for the next few years of your life. And if you start working on an idea that's not fully fleshed out or that doesn't have the legs to support a full-length novel, then you're either going to run out of steam and not finish it, or even worse, you might finish it and realize that no one's interested in reading what you've written because there's just not enough meat to it. And for some people, this decision around which idea to write next doesn't really exist because you kind of have just one story that's consuming your every waking thought and you don't even have the capacity to think about something else. But for other people, it can be really overwhelming or a really hard decision. So first, let's talk about how to decide between multiple story ideas. There are 5 questions or 5 things to think about that can help you sort through your different ideas and help you really narrow in on the next one you want to focus on. So the first thing I want you to consider is, what are your big picture writing goals? So for example, do you plan to pursue traditional publishing, or have you already decided that you're going to self-publish your book? Or maybe one of your big picture goals is that you want to focus on growing a loyal following of fans for your short stories by releasing a new short story on your website every month. And once you start defining what purpose you want your next story to fulfill and how it relates to your overall goals, it should be a lot easier to kind of start narrowing in on which idea or which story is going to help you get closer to achieving those big picture goals. The next thing I want you to consider is, will any of these ideas help me become a better writer? So, for example, the other day I was working with a writer who had 2 different ideas that she was trying to choose between. And one of them was an idea for a romance novel that, in her words, felt really fun and a little bit more fleshed out. The other idea she was considering was one that felt more complicated to her because it was based on her real life experiences, and she just felt a lot of pressure to kind of get it right. So since she was brand new to writing and this was going to be her first book, my advice to her was to go with the idea that felt more fun and exciting and less complex so that she could really focus on learning some of those fundamental writing skills before she ever tackled the other story that felt more challenging and that had more pressure attached to it. And another example of this is if you were considering writing a story with a single point of view versus a story with multiple point of views. So if you're brand new to writing, I'm always going to recommend sticking with a story that has a single point of view so that you can learn what it takes to write a story that works before complicating things with multiple point of views. But on the other hand, if you've already mastered writing from a single point of view, then a story with multiple point of views might be a great next challenge for you. So it really just depends where you're at now and what you're hoping to get better at next. The next thing I want you to consider is, which of the ideas on your list excites you the most, or which one do you actually want to write? And this might seem like a no-brainer, but sometimes it's so easy to get caught up in our new and exciting ideas that we kind of overlook what we actually want to do. And this is important because even though you might have a great idea for a story, If it doesn't excite you or make you look forward to your time writing, then you're probably not going to have enough motivation to see it all the way through to the end. You can also try imagining yourself in 5 years from now and think about what would happen if you didn't write one of these stories. Like, how would you feel if you never followed through on this one idea? And if you feel like you would be completely fine with never having written that particular story, then that idea is probably not worth your time right now. The other thing you can ask is, if you knew that you could only write one more story before you died, which one would you choose? And usually, whatever version of this question you choose to go with, it'll help you figure out which story has most captured your interest and your heart. The next thing I want you to consider is which idea feels the most fleshed out. And this question's helpful because sometimes we have really great ideas, but they're still in the early stages of development and they're just not ready to be written yet. And a little bit later, I'm going to walk you through some questions that will help you flesh out an idea if you find yourself in this situation. So, for example, sometimes you have the making of a great idea, but you might not have any idea what the central conflict of the story is going to be. And I actually see this happen with a lot of the writers I work with. They feel really passionate about certain parts of an idea they have, but because they have no idea what the conflict is going to be, it becomes really hard for them to complete a first draft. So, long story short, until the story is fleshed out enough to support a full-length novel, there's not really a point in spending a ton of time writing it if another story idea is more fleshed out and ready to go. And finally, I want you to consider which idea feels the most original or has the strongest hook. Originality can show up in our stories in many forms, so the idea itself doesn't have to be so unique that there's not going to be a market for it once it's finished, but it does have to be original enough that it's going to catch agents or your future readers' attention. So if one of your ideas has a premise that makes people want to know more, then that might be a good sign that you should work on developing that into a full-length outline or draft. So you might be wondering, what happens if you've gone through those 5 questions and you still feel stuck between 2 or 3 ideas? And if this is you, then my advice is to just pull the trigger on one of them and dig into it, because the only thing worse than having to choose between multiple story ideas is never writing a single word of any of the ideas because you're not taking any kind of forward action. So once you have your list narrowed down to one idea that you want to focus on, or if you've already had an idea that you know you want to focus on, you need to look at what you have and determine if you have a topic or an idea for a story. So let's say you're thinking about writing a story about a vampire or about a character who's running for president. In other words, they are a very small piece of an idea that still needs to be developed into something that can support a full-length novel. So the difference between a topic and an idea for a story is that an idea for a story has a workable premise, whereas topics are little bits of inspiration that haven't found a place to live yet. They're a part of an idea that hasn't found a home. So you might be really excited about writing a story about someone running for president, or about a main character that's a vampire, or about someone who learns that they can do magic, but unless you have a well-rounded and compelling character and riveting conflict to go along with those little snippets of ideas, then you're probably not going to get very far in outlining or drafting because you're going to hit a wall at some point. So the next thing you need to do is take that little nugget of an idea or that topic and turn it into something that can support a full-length novel. And to do that, you're going to want to ask questions like, who is the protagonist of my story and what does he or she want? You're also going to want to know, why does your character want this and what's their plan for trying to get it? Then you're going to want to think about the kind of conflict that your protagonist is going to face as he or she pursues their goal. And you'll want both external and internal conflict for your protagonist to face. So ask questions like, what's standing in your protagonist's way on the outside in their external world? And then what's standing on their way in the inside in their internal world? And then you're going to want to know what's at stake if your protagonist fails to accomplish his or her goal, or what do they stand to lose if they're not successful. And finally, you're going to want to give some thought to the message that you're trying to share with readers. So what do you have to say about the world or your life or life in general or human nature or whatever. Just what do you have to say? What's your point? And then once you've done that and you've kind of fleshed out your idea a little more, I want you to consider what genre best suits your idea. Because when you have a sense of your story's main or global genre, you can really start to see the overall shape of your story, plus get an understanding of what key scenes and genre conventions need to be present in order to write a story that's going to satisfy readers. So, okay, I know that was a lot to go through, but hopefully the tips we went over today will help you whittle down your options by clarifying which ideas align with your goals and abilities as a writer, as well as how to flesh out and strengthen an idea before you start writing a first draft. So let's recap everything we went over. So first, if you're trying to choose between one or more story ideas, I want you to consider things like, what are your big picture writing goals and how does this idea fit into those goals or support those goals? And then which idea has the potential to help me become a better, more stronger writer? And maybe most importantly, I want you to think about which idea excites you and which one you look forward to sitting down and writing. After that, I want you to think about what idea feels the most fleshed out or which idea could be the easiest to outline. And finally, I want you to consider which idea feels the most original or like it has the strongest hook. And once you've done that and you've picked an idea, I want you to remember that a topic is not the same as an idea that can support a full-length story. A topic is usually a small part of an idea that still needs some work before it can support a full-length novel. And lastly, if you need help turning your topic into an idea that can support a full-length story, I want you to focus on what your protagonist wants and why, what kind of conflict your protagonist is going to face as he or she pursues this goal, what's at stake if your protagonist fails to accomplish his or her goal, and then what message you're trying to share with your readers. And as a bonus, I have a freebie for this episode that's going to help you work through your ideas and strengthen any existing ideas you have so that you can be confident that your idea has legs to support a full-length novel. You can get your hands on this freebie at savannahgilbo.com/ideas. So that's it for today's show. As always, I want to thank you so much for tuning in and showing your support. If you want to check out any of the links I mentioned in this episode, you can find them over at savannahgilbo.com/podcast. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the show because there's going to be another brand new episode coming out next week. If you're an Apple user, I'd really appreciate it if you took a few seconds to leave a quick rating and review. Your ratings and reviews tell iTunes that this is a podcast that's worth listening to. And in turn, that helps this show get in front of more fiction writers just like you. So that's it for today's show. I'll be back next week with a brand new episode. Until then, happy writing.